when you come home on a Friday night and look in the mirror, did it matter I was here? Where did I move the dials? The mission is not making everybody feel good. Hell, we'll make everybody feel bad because it's so damned uncomfortable being in a high-growth operation. People have a tendency to kind of make things safe, but in business, we can't be safe and comfortable.
Frank Slootman is the only CEO to have taken 3 enterprise companies public. He also led the largest software IPO in history with Snowflake in 2020. The combined market cap of companies he's led is more than $200 billion. But all of that still doesn't fully capture the impact he's had on Silicon Valley. Frank's playbook on scaling high-performance companies, as captured in his book, Amp It Up, is one that every top CEO borrows from, and one that we'll unpack today. Frank, welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
I want to start at one of the key pillars of your operating philosophy. You've said many times, being a CEO is a confrontational job. Why is it a confrontational job?
It's confrontational, not in the sense that we're always chasing people down, grabbing them by the lapels and telling them they're doing a shitty job. It's more that we're always trying to compress time frames, really envisioning outcomes and goals that are, inspiring and worth getting up for in the morning. And it's really hard because every moment of the day, every interaction that you're having with people, whether it's in a meeting or a hallway conversation or whatever it is, you have an opportunity to change the intensity, the urgency, the pace, as well as, are we aiming high enough? And that's not always a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
So,
is it more about the quality of output, the pace? Do you find it that there's a theme amongst what are the typical confrontational issues?
Well, there's also a confrontation around things that are not working, things that are not working well, things that we're hearing, crises that are developing in different parts of the world, relative to the business. And so there's all of that. So where's the urgency in terms of addressing it? Are we just watching it or what? So you're bringing a perspective to us like, now is the time.
You've clarified that it's not about grabbing people by the lapels, but let's get real, right? Like if somebody's not doing a great job, you're telling them you're not doing a great job, their work output is not to the par that you need it to be. That can get personal pretty quickly. So how do you actually manage that conversation?
Look, when you're a CEO, you're not managing people like a first level manager, right? We're really trying to bring them along into thinking, get a better understanding of their thinking and sort of let the conversation go to a place where we can get people there without getting sort of in their face, if you will. Because once you do that, it's sort of the beginning of the end. And what you really want to do is change their perspective. That's really, what it's about. Now, most people kind of find out a week later when they're starting to reflect on the conversation that maybe they did get their ass kicked, but it was done in a way that was not, in the way most people would think about it,
Do you find that when you're recruiting, you're looking for that ability to take that hard feedback or,
Yeah, absolutely. Because good people like getting feedback, not just hard feedback, any feedback. They want to be better. What am I not doing? What am I not thinking about? Am I thinking hard enough about this? I think people are hungry for that kind of interaction rather than, somebody once, came up to me and said, am I supported, and I'm like, you're here, aren't you? So, if you're here, you are, because if you weren't supported, you wouldn't be here. So stop worrying, stop thinking about stuff like that. That's really, and it was also a wake up call for me because that's really not what I want to hear, that people spend their days worrying about stupid stuff like that. Worry about what you're doing,
Let's keep going deeper. So one of the things I've heard you say is the way you start these conversations with your execs is, how do you think it's going?
Yep.
What happens if somebody thinks it's going good or great, you think it's a complete disaster? What happens then?
Well, then it's like, we're going to go to the part of the conversation. And what about this? What about that? In other words, you start sort of open the aperture on, how it could be better, bigger, more inspiring, and all of that. So, but again, you're trying to sort of let people, instead of, okay, maybe you were thinking it was great. It's obviously implied that I'm not thinking it's great. Otherwise, I wouldn't be having the conversation, right? but you're not doing it in a way that, Steve Jobs used to say, this is total shit. I mean, that can come later if necessary, but that's not where we start in these conversations. Usually when I ask the question, how's it going? They already know, that, probably not that well.
So it is about bringing people along
Yes.
to the same conclusion as you have, rather than telling them, hey, this is what I feel.
Not just the conclusion, it's the way of thinking about it, right? Are we aiming high enough? Are we moving fast enough? Right? Are we settling? How much upside do we have here? And all of that. So it's really ways of thinking about it. Because most of the time, we try to be comfortable rather than incredibly ambitious, about what's going on. And obviously, I want to bring people along to be more ambitious than they otherwise would be.
Speaking of comfort, there is a mental energy required for this kind of confrontation day in, day out. How does that not get tiring? You've done this for 2+ decades. Does it get tiring? How do you avoid getting tired of that?
Yeah, it's literally the opposite for me. This is how I not get tired, by really, injecting myself from the standpoint of, can we do better? Can we do faster? That's actually what's energizing, and everybody gets energized about it because the conversation, really starts to really interrogate what we're doing. Can it be better? Can it be faster? And that's energizing for people that are part of that conversation, as opposed to, we're sort of doing a rinse and repeat. Yeah, it's kind of okay, good enough. Yeah, that's exhausting. Now we want to go home and get a cocktail.
Yeah. But actually, so you're saying it's being part of the right team, because if you are confronting someone and it's difficult to bring them to the same page that, hey, this could be going better, faster, then it can get tiring. But if the person...
Well, then we're into a different conversation at that point. Obviously, I find that I can't even help myself. I mean, even if I wanted to, that's just the style. There's always this perspective of what room up do we have here in this conversation? When are we at a point where we're excited about the pace at which we're moving, the outcomes we're envisioning? And if we're not, we should be excited. We should drive conviction and excitement all the time. If we don't have it, that feels like death to me,
And so I want to talk about recruiting. As you know, at Audacious, our entire philosophy is about recruiting A+ teams around our founders. And I know team and culture are close to your heart. So we'll dive deeper into both these topics. Let's start with your overarching philosophy on teams. Do you have a mental checklist you go through when you're putting together teams, when you're recruiting?
Well, I'm not a guy with, checklists and, game plans and all this kind of stuff. I'm trying to, find really, really good people, for the roles, obviously, that we're looking for. I mean, one thing that we did for years and years in our companies is psychographic profiling. And, they do that through taking the test. So there's a whole bunch of criteria, and people really get plotted on a spectrum and then compared to the rest of the team. Because good teams, they tend to cluster, around these criteria in the same way. Some people, for example, have, they're not very happy with the status quo, generally speaking. And then there's people who are very easily, and they are really content with the way things are. Those people in the same room are not going to do well, right? So it's that sort of thing that we wanted to have, levels of compatibility on certain criteria. Other criteria is actually okay, to have, confrontation, constructive confrontation and all of that. But there are things that, like, you're not going to do well on this team because of the way you score, because these guys are going to drive you nuts. They're going to drive you out of your model, right? And it's like, you won't fit well into this company and this group.
Were you looking for different psychographic profiles for different teams, engineering versus product versus sales?
They are different. I'm not talking about, management team and below, because we were very change oriented companies. You were satisfied with the status quo. That probably wasn't going to go well, because we were always looking to be better and faster. So if you're comfortable with that, you're in the right place.
You also have this framework that I love about drivers versus passengers. How do you identify a driver versus the people who are just good at interviewing as high agency people?
Lucky, I had somebody ask me that once in an all hands meeting in engineering. He said, "How do I know I'm a driver or a passenger?" And I said tongue in cheek, I said, "You better find out before I do." So, but I was only half kidding, because when you come home on a Friday night and look in the mirror, did it matter I was here? Where did I move the dials, right? And that's, it may be unfair, like it's only 1 week, but why not? I still look at myself that way. What did I do this week that's worth a damn? That's a very useful, because when people feel like they're drivers and they're moving the dial and they're very, very necessary and essential during the week, whatever it was, the context, right? They start to feel good about themselves. They start to feel secure in their roles. That's what we want. It's not just that we need drivers to drive the business. It's also, for them to become the persons that they should become, right? So it's a very easy question, to ask. But the reality is, if you're not certain you're a driver, you're probably a passenger.
Yeah.
So
this is similar to the Elon, the famous quote from Elon where he says, "What did you get done today?" Kind of a similar
it's related
philosophy
to that
have.
for sure.
Yeah. But going back to the interviewing part, are there hacks you found or recruiting questions you found to dig deeper into this?
It's like, tell me how you were a driver, in your previous company. Tell me about key episodes, key situations, key project. Well, they usually have to think about that. It's like, geez, right? But that's the whole point of it. And by the way, that says a lot about how a person think of themselves. I had an opinion in a meeting is not necessarily being a driver, because passengers are people that often are articulate. They get along. They don't stand out in a negative way, and that's exactly the problem, right? Because they're right there under your nose, but you don't realize that you're carrying dead weight now, because they're not moving the dials, and that happens to every company. In bigger companies, it becomes like a disease. So you really fight that, and then when the hard thing is, when you sort of become really aware of what you have. Now, people start doing layoffs. Now, layoff is often the strategy to go and deal with that on a much larger scale than a single individual, right? Because they're like, yeah, we have this disease, and we're gonna cut it.
I've also heard you say that you rely a lot on reference checks and specifically back channel reference checks. Correct me if I'm wrong here. You'd like to do a lot more
Well, look,
digging around the candidate.
yeah, I mean, look, what you're getting from an interview is a vibe, which is a word we use a lot lately, with AI. But a vibe is just a feeling, an impression, a sense, and it matters. It's just the same way two dogs get to know each other, whether they kind of have chemistry of some sort and all of that. But you can only find out about people for real is by talking to superiors they've had, subordinates they've had, and peers they've had. One of my favorite questions is that most people in their careers have had trouble with either superiors, subordinates, or peers. Says, which one did you have? You could be one or more, by the way. But not everybody deals equally well with all three of these categories, and there's reasons for that. And people sometimes ask me, well, what about you? What did you have trouble with? I had trouble with peers. Never had trouble with superiors or with subordinates. And the reason that happens is, ambitious people will start to clash because, everybody has their own sandbox and all that kind of stuff. And you assume great ownership, which, often people in the organization don't like it when you do that. So that's actually an answer that I like when I hear that. But, your trouble with subordinates, that's usually not what you want to hear. But you can talk to people who overlap with these people in companies. And when you talk to enough people, the pictures start to really solidify and crystallize. You really get a good sense of what you're dealing with. And by the way, people don't invest. They should invest 90% of their time in that part of the process rather than I have somebody interviewed by 15 people.
Yeah. Actually, can you quantify that? Let's say you're hiring for a head of sales, CRO. How many references would you feel, okay, I've done enough work?
Well, I mean, I would go back certainly to the last 5 years of where they've been at least. And if things are kind of crystallizing at that point, otherwise I'd keep going. Or I'd try to find, more people that overlapped in that period of time. Because you can go inside your own company and find people that overlapped with them and say, hey, do you know so-and-so, at this company? And they go, oh, yeah. Oh, who else should I talk to? I mean, it's actually not that hard to do, but I find that people, they think it's a checkbox process. And I think it's absolutely not that. It's really the crux of trying to understand, how people perform. And also to find out, what what makes this person better versus what's really not good for this person. Where do they struggle, right? So it's just everybody has puts and takes. So finding that out, people have history. It's about finding out about it.
Yeah. Okay, so that's pretty comprehensive. Did that go down all the way to your organization where you're not hiring, but you're the hiring manager is somebody else, a VP of sales hiring sales reps or sales managers? Did you kind of superimpose that throughout your organizations where they're doing a lot of back channel references?
Recruiting is a massive operation in companies, right? Because if you hire 100 people, I mean, how many thousands of people are you considering in that process? So yeah. And that's also the reason, why we sort of, try to drive conclusions too quickly. And then you get turnover because, we didn't do all our homework that we could have done. We didn't have high conviction. Having high conviction about hiring is really important, because, when there's doubt, there's no doubt. That was our tiebreaker. And we needed to feel really strongly about it. That's how you do good hiring. But again, it's painful. It's hard. It's slower. Right. What's really painful is having to part ways with people, and then have to start it again, the process,
This is one of your mantras that you just said. So I want to double click on that. When there's doubt, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
That's specific to recruiting that you had across your organization.
No, it's about not just about recruiting. It's absolutely everything. Because we need to get to high conviction, when there's doubt and, we have mixed feelings. That's not a starting point. Okay.
How soon would you realize that you've made a hiring mistake?
Usually when I start asking the team, how's so-and-so doing? And then, what happens in organizations, people either get, embraced, right? And everybody is thrilled they're there, or it's the opposite. Everybody's like, what the hell is this all about? So it's not in a gray zone typically. It's either, strong adoption or the inverse, off that. And in other words, it's not even what I think. It's, when I ask 10, 15 people, a picture starts to emerge. And I don't ask it one time, I ask it all the time. So I can follow so it's not like, okay, a weekend, we're coming to, that's not how it is, but it can start the trend.
What signals tell you though, when to coach versus when to fire?
You always start off, and actually you always start off, to see if you can do an intervention, which is really what, what coaching is. I've learned over the years, that's often a fool's errand that you're already down the path. You just don't want to believe it yet. And I've learned over the years, you should pull the trigger way quicker when you sort of find yourself in these situations. And that's just from experience because, we start coaching and in the end, we have to separate anyway. So all we have is lost time and effort,
Is your belief that superstars show up on day one as superstars?
Well, you typically recognize them as superstars very, very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. Absolutely. It's almost apparent immediately,
One of the other things you've talked about over the years is you feel like CEOs tolerate too much mediocrity.
Yeah.
But, CEOs are ambitious, they're outcome-oriented people. Why do they tolerate mediocrity for so long when they can see it?
Well, the biggest reason is they don't want to, fess up to a bad decision because they now think that makes them look badly. So I always campaigned against it. I said, look, Scott McNeely used to say, fail fast. And I've often repeated that, once you realize, you're in a bad place, now is the time to move on it. Having nobody is better than having somebody who's not the right person because people don't just watch what you do. They watch what you don't do. It becomes a leadership, challenge where people are wondering like, why is he not moving,
And maybe some of this is actually going back to the confrontation topic. You have to also be comfortable confronting yourself.
Yeah, look, I always, when I made these mistakes, and I made plenty, I was very public about moving on, from one person. Sometimes I had to shift gears several times on the same role. In the early days of ServiceNow, we had to hire, somebody that was going to run our cloud. Back then, that was not an established thing. There were very few people that had any clue about it. And the ones who did have a clue about it wasn't much, right? So we went through a few people, believe me, before we kind of settled in. And Yeah, it was painful to publicly acknowledge that we screwed it up, not just once, but several times. But I'm like, guys, we're going to keep doing this until we get it right. And that's how I want you to think about it as well. You keep doing it until you get it right. And people that start to basically justify their bad decisions, that's bad culture, obviously. It's not what you want.
So I'd love to shift gears towards your operating cadence. What did a Monday for Frank Slootman look like as a CEO? What does the week look like? Did you have weekly one-on-ones with your execs? Walk us through your operating cadence.
Yeah, we usually had a Tuesday morning meeting, which not everybody was always there in person. Most people were, or they dialed in. But that was sort of a lightning round, connecting the dots. What's going on? What should the team know about? And we go around the room, and anybody, and it didn't matter whether you were the head of sales or the head of HR. You could bring up things that you felt people. But we asked people, why does the team have to know about that? Because sometimes it's just kind of a bilateral issue. We don't have to have that in full form. You can just go to the person and deal with it. We're not like, throw it in the group kind of a thing, but you need to have connective tissue in an organization where everybody has a sense of what's going on. And then that everybody they're running the company together, right? So they need to hear and sort of appreciate the issues. And then oftentimes people come back next week because they need to report back. We need to do more research and answer specific questions, about what's going on. And it could go on for several weeks, those kinds of things. And sometimes there were crises, that we had to get on. And especially things that were super urgent. The beginning of the week is a good time to, right,
Yeah.
to get visibility to, hey, there's something that's brewing. Organizations left to their own devices, they very quickly become disconnected, or they start operating in their own cylinders. Some companies are legendary where everybody kind of lives in their own cylinder. They never talk to anybody outside of their department and all that nonsense. I mean, I deliberately, crossed those boundaries because I figured if I did it at my level, they would do it at their level. And we had a saying, it was like, go direct. I would often get emails, from people, and they would go, we should do this, we should do that. And I'm like, why don't you go take this up with so-and-so, because they actually are the person you should talk to about this. But no, they wanted to talk about it with me. In other words, they wanted to go up and then sort of, basically let me carry the water. I'm like, no, if you feel strongly, go over there. You don't need a permit or a license to talk to anybody in this organization ever. Okay.
And so the weekly team meeting happens on Tuesday. Did you have weekly one-on-ones with your CXOs? Everyone.
Not just my direct reports, the entire exec team. And then, oftentimes I would participate in team meetings in other departments. I just sat there to listen. I didn't want to try to dominate them because then I'm disturbing their dynamic. But, that typically would happen. People would then start asking me questions that they could only ask me in that forum. And that was fine. We didn't do it every week, but they enjoyed having me sit at the table and kind of interact with them. So it was good in that way. We did a lot with engineering because they were always very curious. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? It's good for people to see you. And I mean, CEOs need to have high presence in the organization, and not just in your main office, but all over, wherever you're operating. Customers need to see you. Your local people need to see you, hear you, spend time with you. That's how you connect tissue.
Let's talk about setting growth goals. In one of your interviews, I heard you say about growing fast. I've always leaned in hard, but in hindsight, I could have leaned in more. How should CEOs think about leaning into their growth, product market fit, and setting the right growth? Like, what is the right growth goal for a year ahead? How do you even set that?
You want to lean in, as hard and as much as you can sort of reasonably or even unreasonably, come to your own mind, right? Yeah, I mean, is there a point where you're driving things over a cliff, right? Where you cannot mobilize these assets; they're not going to become productive, and you're right. You get chaos. But here's the thing: I mean, 99% of all people don't lean in hard enough, right? They are on their heels. And use a ski term. Skis are designed to be over, not on your heels, but that's how they behave. and people are naturally risk averse. Like, well, what if I did too much? Yeah, that's the life we live. Welcome to the club. Because if you have a good company and a good product, odds are that not leaning in hard enough is a huge mistake, because this is how you create separation from your competition, and the whole dynamic in the company changes when you have higher growth than everybody else. Fundraising becomes easier, valuations go up, I mean, on and on and on. So I would say, look, you push it as hard as you can until the evidence starts to pile up that you're overdoing it. Usually the evidence piles up that you're underdoing it if you have a good company. Now, if you don't have a good company, the resources will not convert to yield. Now you know what your problem is, right? I mean, you just don't have something that will scale. But if you do have something that will scale, this is where the not leaning hard enough problem shows up. I had a conversation a long time ago with our VP of sales, and we were going from 45 million, and and I was one of them to do the first step on the plan. I didn't hand the plan down. I said, no,
This is data domain.
Yeah, it's data domain. So you tell me what you think the plan should be, and whether I was going to agree with it is another matter. But you're doing it first. Now, of course, salespeople are notorious for sandbagging, because they want to overachieve. That's how they make money. But fine, they put up 100 million from 45. It's now 20 years ago, whatever, longer. So back then, those were really significant numbers, and the board would have easily rubber stamped that. But he went through the entire model, exactly what we would do to achieve those numbers, and I just said, well, if you had to do 125, what would you do different? He started to then explain, what he would do different. I'm like, well, why don't we just do that then?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He kind of got tricked into this conversation a little bit, but we did do 125 million. So it was absolutely possible by changing the assumptions. And the lesson there is more that goals are incredibly powerful, because when people get a goal, they start to go like, okay, I now need to break this down in terms of what I need to do to achieve that. So you got to be very careful with goals, because they are insanely powerful. They can also be limp, because if you don't set it high enough, you're just wasting the potential of your business, right? So I find goals incredibly inspiring, and you want a goal that inspires, because that causes people to get up in the morning and go, yeah, we're going to get after this, and all that kind of stuff. So goals are very, very important.
It reminds me of this Peter Thiel, I think, trick or framework where he'll ask a person, what's your 10-year goal? And the person will say, blah, blah, blah. And then his feedback will be, why can't you achieve this in 1 year? Yeah. And his main point there is that often people have these mental models around, we have to do X, then we'll do Y, and then Z, and it all has to be sequential. And his point is often those sequential things are in people's mind. You can do a lot of that in parallel.
Yeah, I mean, it's unreasonable assumptions sometimes. You discover potential that you didn't think was there. Plus people have a tendency to kind of make things safe and comfortable. So nobody's going to come back to them and saying like, "Well, that was stupid," right? Nobody wants to get called on it, so they want to be safe and comfortable. But that's in business, we can't be safe and comfortable. We just can't. So we're all out on the limb. Congratulations. That's how it is. And yes, you need to meet your hiring quotas in all the different categories of quota. I mean, hiring is just as important as selling, So it's a model, it's a machine that is instrumented and resourced. And when you do that correctly, and the machine is obviously something that works, then it's going to do it.
Talk to me about decision velocity. How important is speed of decisions versus getting everybody aligned, especially as organizations have many layers?
Yeah, we're getting everybody aligned is nice. It is not essential. Getting the right people aligned is essential. So you work on that. Who's really essential to this conversation? We're not looking for consensus building as a goal in its own right. It's really about who are the people that are really carrying the execution of what's going on. They need to buy in, right? Otherwise, it's not going to work. So speed, there are times where you're going to have to go before you're comfortable or ready. That can happen a lot, because waiting is a bigger risk than not going. So having a bias for action, generally speaking, is a good thing, because, the action, it triggers the energy, and it then accelerates the learning that's going to happen along the way. Well, if you're wrong, okay, fine, we'll restart. We'll regroup. We do all these things. But you don't want to be going off half-cocked if that's not necessary. So it's not one answer to these questions. You need to be more thoughtful and contextual than that. I sometimes feel a need to make decisions when we have a crisis situation going on. We make decisions. We also, when we have just unacceptable, cultural episodes, things that have to do with harassment in an organization, I will pull the trigger like that day. Okay, you'll be gone before 4:30, stuff like that, because I'm here to protect the employees in the organization as well. And when violations happen, it's like, well, you think I'm really going to sit here and study it? Right. But by the way, obviously, we need to establish that these things really happen. We're not going to go half-cocked there either. But once that is established, yeah, we move. Absolutely. And any organization gets very strong signals about, hey, certain behaviors, they're going to be met with consequences very, very quickly.
You touched on culture there. I want to read some of your principles on culture. I'm quoting you. Standards are the real culture. What you tolerate compounds faster than what you praise. Culture is not a poster on a wall. It's a willingness to prosecute the deviation of culture. And then culture is not about making people feel good. It's about enabling the mission. What does culture mean to you in real operational terms? I've heard you, actually, part of the reason I was prepared for this is I've heard you speak about culture in a prior dinner. So would love to hear.
To most people, especially in Silicon Valley, they think a good culture is one where everybody is happy and feels good about being there. That's what they think culture is. And I'm like, no, that's not what it is. The culture is there to enable the mission. And the mission is not making everybody feel good. Hell, we'll make everybody feel bad because it's so damned uncomfortable being in a high growth operation, right? So what does the culture have to do to enable the mission is the question. What behavior enables the mission? And that can, obviously depend on, what the mission is, but, there's obviously things that are be very common. I mean, a willingness to grow much faster than is comfortable, and willingness to, go with a much higher risk posture than is comfortable, much higher efforts, than what you're comfortable with, or all these kinds of things. So the culture can become a real asset to you, or it can be a bloody liability, to your mission.
Did you have cultural values or operating principles?
At Data Domain, because we were a startup, I mean, we crafted all of that. I had very high focus also on respectful interaction. Integrity was non-negotiable, because, I needed that in the organization, for the business to really work, that we behaved correctly in front of the customers at all time, that we treated our own people as well as people outside of the organization, correctly. It is amazing how much business benefits you get from these. You may think like, well, that's just the right thing to do. Yes, it is, but it also has tremendous business, benefit. And that I wanted to establish that really clearly. And, when I became aware of exceptions to that, and that happens a lot in all companies, we would prosecute them, because that's the only way people learn, A, that they're there, and B, that there are consequences. And that culture really happens when you're willing to prosecute it. Otherwise, it's just good intentions. What the road to hell is paved with, so.
So culture is really about enabling the mission, and you have these 3 criteria for missions: big, clear, and not about money. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, the money thing is it's like if you had a mission that said we want to be worth $100 billion or whatever, some stupid number, people don't get energized, electrified by that. And it's like, oh, well, I mean, maybe it's going to be a much bigger number, for Christ's sake. So, I mean, it's like, money is a demotivator. It's not really a motivator. In other words, it works against you when it's not there. When it is there, it doesn't do that much. It really doesn't activate the tissue, if you will, of the organization. You see that, with Elon Musk all the time. He talks about, what he's doing. He's trying to better mankind. I mean, there's probably no nobler, sense of defining mission than that, right? Save society from itself, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's very inspiring. It's very noble, and it's for people that's worth getting up for. So yeah, those are things. But I always told our employees just that when I start chatting with them in a large group format, like all hands meetings, to say, I'm here to better your station in life. So you may think that I'm just here to make money for myself or my family. So actually, I'm not. He says, I'm going to make money for you.
Mm.
People were dumbfounded by the fact that I would make a statement like that, but I really meant it. But obviously, if I made money for them, I would make money for every other stakeholder in the process. And in other words, there was complete alignment, along those lines. And there's no greater reward that you get as a CEO of a company is when you realize you have impacted the lives of many people. It's something, people usually during the holidays, after a few glasses of wine, they become emotional because they just can't believe where they are, and they never thought that would be possible, right? And then they'll send you a text, and just immense appreciation for having been on the journey, and yeah, that lasts much longer than a little bit of money that you've made along the way. We kind of become blasé about it, but I never become blasé about other people, their families, baby, essentially having that sense of security and liberation in their life is a really big deal. I don't think people talk about that enough, because that is what happens in Silicon Valley. I mean, and I don't think people realize how wide the blast radius is, when large value is created.
So, all of this is energizing when there's winning happening in the marketplace, when things are going well. But when things are against you, man, people are already exhausted. How do you maintain intensity and culture when a market downturn is happening, or when COVID happened, like in the early part of 2020? Can you talk about how do you maintain that energy in the organization?
Yeah,
Then?
but look, you can just as easily use that, to energize teams, because usually, and other leaders have said this, they like it when the chips are down, because there's all this upside, right? When the stock is high, it's asymmetrical now. In other words, we have far more downside than we have upside. Right? I've lived that scenario, myself. That ain't great. What you want is having tons of upside. You want to be asymmetrical in the other way. So there's ways, to really energize teams when they feel the challenge. We're in it together. Here's what we're going to do. It's very energizing. So I think crisis can be used for good measure.
Could you give us a real example during COVID, or a different example where things changed? There was a dramatic conflict in the world,
Yeah,
or
COVID was a obviously scary time for tons of people. Probably, we were a cloud company. I mean, we literally walked off the job. I shouldn't say we walked off the job. We walked out of our offices overnight, and we didn't reconvene for years. And I was like, holy shit, I have a company that is what exactly? And we needed to continue, to sell and develop and deliver and support and do all these things. How is this going to happen? So, we just kind of, we came together, we invented, new institutions, new processes, to sort of, deal with, the lack of having proximity to people all day long. You could run into people in the hallway and have a chat, and all of a sudden that wasn't there anymore. One thing I did back then, I started writing an email on the weekends, and it would go out on Monday morning to the entire company, thousands of people, and it came directly from my hand, typos, Dutch English, I mean everything. It was not reviewed, it was not edited, nothing. It went directly from my email, right? And I wrote about things that I wanted to write about because of it. It related sometimes to broader topics, sometimes to what I had seen and was part of the week before. And then I tried to put it in a format. In other words, why am I contextualizing this as being relevant? Why do you need to know about it? Because I use it as my personal Twitter feed, if you will, at the time, where I have an opportunity to talk directly to everybody every single week. What am I going to say? What am I trying to convey? And it became such an institution because lots of people would then email me. And by the way, very wide-ranging topics.
yeah.
So people were always surprised, like, well, what is he going to talk about this week, right? And sometimes it was just fun stuff. And then people would ask me questions. Any good shows you've seen? Anything you recommend? I mean, it was hysterical.
Mm.
What kind of a conversation would happen. And so, in other words, from these circumstances often come very interesting, accommodations and institutions that take. I did that for 4 years straight. Even after we got back into the office, people were like, you can't stop, because it's the first thing they said. This is my first cup of coffee on Monday is what I look for. If I'd be traveling and I was late, people are sending emails. Where's your email?
Yeah.
You start panicking. It's like something has happened. I'm like, no, I'm just like, sorry.
That's great. So actually, that was then a weekly email every Monday morning
Every
goes
Monday,
out.
always at the same time.
Yeah, that's great.
So, but you institutionalize certain things, and when companies get bigger, it's really hard to maintain that sense of fabric. That's people. I gave people a sense, an opportunity to know me through what I conveyed, because it was very personal, familiar style to them, the way you talk and how you talk. It's like they're like, I know this guy because this is how he talks.
That's great.
Yeah.
So
it's not a sterile, abstract company communications and big words like vision and mission. No, none of that. It was very, very concrete.
So talking about crisis moments, these are also particularly anxious times in tech. AI is changing so much, and there's a sense of anxiety amongst founders and CEOs that in 1 to 2 years, we're all going to be in a haves or have-nots category. And especially because it's not just about calm execution to manage through a changing time. It's like people's entire product roadmaps and business models are up for grabs. What would you advise, or how are you advising CEOs in today's time to manage this volatile environment?
Yeah. Well, number one is, first of all, that also represents great opportunity, right? Secondly, you may have been comfortable before, but you probably shouldn't have been. This is just one giant wake-up call that you're getting, In other words, are you getting it? Are you processing this, right? There's a lot of people stick with plans because, well, it seems okay. I'm not hearing anything. And now all of a sudden, massive wake-up call and anxiety. But we're living in lives of anxiety all the damn time. I do. Even when things are going well, do you think I believe it's going to go well tomorrow? Not necessarily, if I have no reason to. People always want to believe things that are pleasing because then they can go back to sleep and they can sleep well at night. But as leaders in your organization, no, we actually drive the high anxiety in the ranks, and then we actually think that's a good thing. I need people to be on their toes and not take things for granted. So in other words, they need to embrace this rather than be afraid of it.
But AI is changing so much about companies, how companies build product. Engineering is changing dramatically, pricing is changing dramatically.
Yeah, everything might be useless at this point.
Yeah.
Is that a possibility? Yeah, is that a possibility? Yes, it is. Yeah, it's scary, isn't it? Well, try being a fifth grader. You don't know shit. How high anxiety would it be to be a fifth grader? You enter the world and you're like, I don't know nothing.
Do you have thoughts on how you'd be running a company differently today than how you've run? To the point you're talking, I don't know nothing in today's environment.
Well, I mean, I made a massive change, at Snowflake because of the fact that our swim lanes were evaporating on us. Right, we had a business motion and a selling motion that was highly predictable, incredibly successful, comfortable, profitable. I mean, on and on and on. And then through AI, you see the swim lanes. They're not going away; they're still there, but they're also starting to evaporate. In other words, we're getting into a mega market, where the boundaries are much bigger, but also very different. And it's sort of what Intel said when they moved on from memory chips. They had to embark on the journey, but they couldn't see the other side. And that's what this is. We can't see the other side. So your whole mode of execution and operating is so different because you have to try many, many things, and many things will not work. But hopefully some will, right? So you're attacking the anxiety through action, right? Because the worst thing is just sitting there waiting. Well, let's see what happens. No, that's not what we want to do. We want to get after it as hard and as smart as we can. And it's going to be tons of false starts. We've already seen the false starts. Everybody chasing, LLMs and all this kind of stuff that all turned out to be insane, right? But that's what happens when people are anxious. Yeah.
Your book lays it all out. It's one of the most brilliant business books. Narrow the focus, raise the standards, increase the pace, align your team, transform your strategy. Those are the five. I memorized it properly. But why do more people not execute it? Like, what comes in the way of actually knowing this versus executing on it?
I don't know. I find it self-evident, from where I'm coming from. It's just a way of thinking. It's not a philosophy. It's just how you approach stuff, sort of a first principles type of thing. I think what is really troublesome is when, people execute according to what they've done before, what worked for them before, what worked in that circumstance. I sometimes see people, do their job they did in their previous company the exact same way, even though we're a different business, a different phase of evolution. It's like, it makes no sense. It's mindless. So people that can really think, first principles in the context that they're in, that's really, hence these conversations about, can this be faster? Why don't we talk about this tomorrow instead of 2 weeks from now,
Mhm.
right? What's going to be different in 2 weeks?
Mhm.
Right. So, and there may be an answer to that question, but there also, I always say, look, if you leave people to their own devices, pretty soon you'll be the DMV, which is the shittiest service experience, almost not everywhere, but in many places. It's lethargic. It's unmotivated. They just want to go home. That's not good, right? You're running companies. You want to have a gung ho, driven, uber ambitious group of people. That's what you want, right? And so that's why these conversations that are challenging and what you call confrontational are fine. That's part of that mode. People would expect that, and if you don't, you can go back to your cubicle at IBM. I don't know.
Let's talk about the inner game. The world sees you as the super successful CEO. Did you ever have doubt on yourself?
All the time.
Just to say more. So let's divide that into when you first became CEO of Data Domain in the earlier days of you being a CEO, and then also talk about Snowflake, where you've built Data Domain, you've built ServiceNow, and you're coming in as a third time CEO. So let's start with Data Domain. Talk about self doubt and
Right.
how did you deal with it?
The Data Domain was incredibly challenging for me personally because it's a startup. We have
Mm.
no idea what we've got.
Maybe set the context. How many people were there in the
There
company?
are like 15, 16 people somewhere in there. Myself and one of the co-founders were the only people who didn't write any code at the time. We had a couple of units in tests. It was we didn't know, just didn't know. So, it was my first CEO job. So it was also a sense of, I burned the ships behind me. I can't go back
Yeah.
ever. It's this or else kind of a thing. And that level of motivation, you'll never replicate that again in your life, because, later on, when you've done things, you get gold stars behind your name and, everybody, is out to get you into their companies. That's very flattering and all of that. But there was a time where, if I fail, God knows what will happen, to
Yeah.
me and my family at that point.
So how do you deal with that?
I couldn't fail. And so fear of failure, whether you think that's good, bad, or indifferent, it was an enormous driver, enormous. So it so sharpens the perception of everything, right? How we spend money, in other words, keeping oxygen in the tank, managing one fundraising milestone, to another, being incredibly efficient with resources, being all over our customers, like literally being all over. So in other words, it was a very, very intense operating group of people. We were incredibly judgmental, about, where the people were making it or not making it. So it was so high on the census, right? It was visceral. And that we also made really good decisions along the way that, the company, there were like 15 companies in this space. And we separated from them. We broke out. Everybody, when they saw us separating, everybody started second guessing their own strategies, doing restarts, and we stuck to our guns the entire way. We had this mantra: tape sucks. 2 words that basically described the entire business, the entire problem. And everybody nodded. You're right. Tape sucks. What do you got? And then we're like, we put tape out of its miserable existence, which is what it was. It was an industry, that was, way overdue. It had to go away.
But when you have those doubts, do you just ignore them? Do you shun them away in a corner of your mind? How do you embrace
the opposite? I mean, it's like facing your demons, like for breakfast. It's like you just wanted to be in it, as opposed to, no, you're not compartmentalizing. It's like going headfirst for it, because you're more comfortable attacking it than anything else. As long as we were attacking it with everything we've had, we had some measure of comfort around, our daily, existence, right? I mean, in the first year, I didn't know how we were going to survive, because I had a product that was, 1 terabyte usable space, hard to believe. And it was a full 3U rack, and it was operating about 25 megabytes a second. Well, we couldn't back up a file server or a database server, and everybody's like, that's a nice idea, but that will never work in my environment. We found a way to stay alive that first year through use cases that were sized enough, if you will, for us to be able to sell. And we sold about $3 million that first year, and that gave us a whole. And by the way, we weren't spending any money. It was very small. One sales guy, and we did all the selling and all of that. But we stayed alive for a year. The year 2, I mean, we had a product that was more than twice as big, more than twice as fast. The aperture started to open, right? And from there, we always said bigger, faster, and we turned that crank over and over. We were predicated on a CPU platform, not on a disk I/O. So in those days, through the Intel multi-coring strategy, I mean, the CPU strategy, it leaped like every year enormously. So, I mean, we were going like this in price performance. And disk I/O, of course, is absolute death, because it barely moves on a year-to-year basis. So we have the correct architecture, the correct strategy, and we separated technically and business-wise from everybody. I mean, data domain was sold for more money, way more money than everybody else combined. It was the absolute runaway, winner in that business, and it still exists to this day. It's still a multi-billion-dollar revenue segment.
So taking action allows you to attack your doubt. Like you run towards it and take action against it, rather than.
That's one of the biggest lessons that I've had for a very long time. Is when you're in a place where you're like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to solve this. The way to deal with that is, you attack it with everything you've got, right? Every amount of energy you have, you're going to force it onto that problem. And then you learn that very unexpected things happen. The old saying is, when you commit, Providence commits as well. So things start to happen to you that are unexpected, because your conviction and your commitment is so high that now, I mean, the world is changing with you to help you. Whereas when you hesitate, the world does nothing.
Yeah.
Actually, it might be working against you. And I have lived that dynamic many times. That's why I'm super high conviction that, high focus, on problems. You're gonna break them, and in other words, you're gonna find a path. It's a matter of how much time do I have, how much resources, how hard do I concentrate on it, and there's other entrepreneurs that they know about this, that this is the dynamic. If you can bring it to it, I mean, amazing things can happen. But if you're gonna go at it, with PowerPoint presentations and smart talk, I mean, it's all about the degree of focus, and then the amount of resources, and then, people whose standards are impossible.
What kind of doubt would still plague you as the CEO of Snowflake when you've been already so successful, what you're doing?
Well, I did something, fairly unusual, at Snowflake. I knew, I had to, replace myself at some point, in the future, because I wasn't getting any younger. And, because we were caught up in the middle of AI, me not being, somebody that is sort of at the forefront of AI, but this is what I think CEOs should do. They should look at the business not like, oh, I want to hang on to my job. No, what's best for the company? What gives the company the best chances to succeed given these circumstances? And Sridhar is a guy who can start up a team in the morning and have things to show in the afternoon. I
Yeah.
mean, it is like unlike anything you've ever seen. And he's an absolute pit bull, and that is what you need. That's what I felt the company needed more than what I knew how to do. Now, there were a lot of things where he had limited experience, coming from Google and all this kind of stuff. Where we're like, look, everybody has puts and takes. We're going to bet on what he has as opposed to, what he doesn't, right? And so that's how you make these kind of decisions. So, and in other words, it's very weird as a CEO to go like, I don't think I'm the best play at this
Yeah.
point. I think this guy. By the way, I was a large individual shareholder, so I wasn't. This was not charity on my part. Okay,
Yeah.
so I thought the shareholders would do better, this way. And I think we're now 2 years in, and it's super clear to me now, because it takes time. He absolutely is, because I've seen the revolution unfold, and we're talking about
Yeah.
it, you know.
What was your personal week like as a CEO? How did you manage your mental health, staying healthy, not burning out? Can you talk about the non-work side that we don't see?
Yeah, there's not much of a non-work side. People that talk about work-life balance, I don't even know what that means, because if you try to make that distinction, I don't know how you do these jobs. I just don't know. And I think most people that have these jobs don't know either. They pour everything they've got into it, and the family and everybody around you, they make those compromises, and they do it, and it's hard, especially when you do it for like 20 plus years. But it also, there comes a time where we don't want to keep doing this, because again, I'm the quarterback who doesn't know how to get off the field. It can't become so interwoven with who you are that has to now become who you are. I mean, I'm not that person. I can live without it.
But did you manage, like, did you have a weekly routine around either exercising or sleep or something that helped
Yeah,
you
well,
sustain yourself for this longer time?
well, you do burn yourself up. There's just no other way around it, because you're adrenaline soaked, you're sleep deprived, you're all these things. When you're home, you're not home, meaning that you're preoccupied, with tons of stuff. I mean, I had a 5-year episode where I was, racing triathlons, and of course, every day triathlons is 99% training and 1% racing. But that was very beneficial, because it just, I spent hours on the bike or long runs. You have time to think and reflect. And that was incredibly beneficial, because, you physically felt good. And then, in your mind, you had worked out a lot of things, established clarity about things that you didn't have before you stepped on the bike. So having something like that is really, really good. But, being sleep deprived and adrenaline soaked is not great, because we have, I'm saying people like us will have long lasting effects of that. It changes your basic, yeah. I mean, you'll never sleep well the rest of your life,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. One of the quotes I remember from you, and I might be paraphrasing here, is everyone is into feeling good. I'm into feeling not good. And I love it because I kind of subscribe to the same psyche, but can you say more as to what do you mean by that?
No, because we swarm to the ball. Okay,
Yeah.
well, we're going to go to that place where we know it's not good, it's uncomfortable. A lot of people want to. If you want to feel good, maybe you should. I don't know what you should do, but in business, we're going to go find and go to those places, right? So I always tell people, you see me smiling, that's not a good sign. You want to see me with a frown on my face, because that means I'm completely invested in what's going on. If I'm smiling, I better have a damn good reason why I'm smiling, as opposed to a bad reason why I'm smiling, right? So, I was comfortable being unhappy. I like to be in an unhappy state, because that told me, I'm invested in dealing with the issues that I need to deal with. I'm comfortable being in that mode. I'm very uncomfortable not being in that mode.
All right. We are going to go for a quick fire round. You ready?
Go.
A CEO you admire and why?
I'm a huge fan of both Elon Musk and, for obvious reasons. If you don't understand that, you probably need to take a closer look, as well as Steve Jobs. I have quoted Steve Jobs over the time. so many times because I thought he was very funny, and also, and he chronalized things, and it just so well reflected what I was trying to say. And both these men, obviously they changed the world. They created markets. They killed markets.
Yeah.
So it's like, isn't that what we're all getting up for in the morning? It was absolutely amazing.
What's the question you ask in every interview when recruiting an exec?
I've often answered this question, and the question is my first question, because when I start to talk to people, it's like, tell me what's your innate God-given thing that you're super good at, and that is almost effortless to you, and that just everybody else is amazed that you know how to do this. Could be golf for all I know. I don't know, but it's a thing, and we all have something that we are, sort of disproportionately good at. I want to know what that is, because when I hire somebody, that's really what I'm buying. I'm not buying your experience, because I can get you experience. It's not hard. I cannot get you aptitude. You bring that. What is it? What do you think it is? Right? And a lot of people, it takes a lot of people off guard. They think it's a trick question, and it's not. And I start discussing it with people, because they're really uncomfortable. Some people, have really good answers. A lot of people, I don't think they've ever been asked that question before. The inverse is also, they think that's definitely a trick question, which is, what are you not good at? What should we never ask you to do?
Yeah.
Right? What job is just absolutely lost on you? Because that also says a lot, right? And I that's the first part, because that's really knowing, what I'm buying, right? By the way, I ask, when I do references, I ask that question too. Like, what do you think this guy's superpower is? What's your superpower? Right? We use that word a lot now. That's what it is. What's your superpower?
A red flag that you never ignore in recruiting.
Bad vibe. The word vibe is also, very trendy, obviously. It's just a feeling that you don't know what to make of it. But that's not good. You can't ignore that. And you don't have to, turn it into a big thing. But I'll never get over that. I want to feel strongly about the interaction, not knowing anything else yet.
Most overrated startup advice.
There's, I think what happens a lot in companies, they start scaling prematurely. Before they really are ready or have established viability, product market fit. They don't even know what that looks like, what that feels like, when the right time really is. They just think, well, you build a product and then you just start filling out an org chart. The other thing that I find a huge mistake is people want to fill out the org chart from the top down. And I'm like, no, you go from the bottom up. We don't need, second layer sales manager when you're a popsicle stand. You have only one guy that can't even get to have his quota. It's just absolute nonsense, right? What I've seen over and over is that, we see sales executives failing all the time. It's not because they fail per se. It's because the product, is not selling. And the reality is, lousy salespeople can sell a very good product quite well. I've lived it. I've seen it. It's just an established thing. And great salespeople cannot sell a shitty product. So it's, we start believing we have something, and then we have pressures from VCs and all this kind of stuff. Like, we got to go, show that we're going to market, and it's all becoming mechanical. It's like, no, you keep your powder dry until you see the white of their eyes. The time will come when it's extremely obvious that you have to pivot and open the floodgates. And if it's not obvious, it's not time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Biggest misconception about you?
Well, by far the biggest conception about me is that I'm a real hard ass. I'm a real softy. In many ways. I'm also highly collaborative and facilitative. I'm not a hand it down the mountain, do what I'm goddamn well telling you. There's none of that with me. I already told you I try to bring people along in thinking, right? Because it's not just about me saying something. It's about I want to make their thinking more beneficial to themselves and to the company, and also in our relationship. Because if we don't speak the same language and we don't see the eye to eye, we'll have lots of friction. and things will not be happening. Eventually, we're going to start separating, right? So that's why I do that. I just want to, when you work really well with people, it's a great thing.
A mistake you still think about?
Well, one enormous mistake is that I waited 10 years to come to Silicon Valley. And, I came from Europe. I wasn't, the computer industry, this is what we call it back then. We didn't call it tech or software or anything or AI. It was just called computer industry. Silicon Valley was nascent in those days, right? It was really hardware at that point. Software was barely an industry. But, I so underestimated and not just underestimated, didn't understand the significance of where you are, how impactful that is on your career. And to this day, when I talk to people that are looking for career advice out of school, and I get asked a lot to speak to these graduating classes, and I never miss an opportunity to say, the first thing you got to decide is where are you physically going to be? Because a lot of young kids, they want to be where their friends are. That's stupid. I'm sorry. Or they want to be where they got a big title and a big salary. Stupid. Okay. The place where you are is going to dominate what opportunities, you're going to have and the types of people you're going to be associating with. That's going to shape your career. And you manage your career over its entire duration, not over your next job, right? Because that's what happens, all the time, that people they manage from one job to another. And after 10 years, you look at their resume and you're like, what the hell were you thinking?
Mm-hmm.
All these shitty companies in here, and they can't explain it either because they just did one thing at a time. So it's just much better, I focus on where I'm going to be. The second question is, who am I going to be with in that geography, right? You want to, find a company that is, a big brand in the sense that it's respected and well regarded and seen as a very talented, successful group of people, because it lays a foundation, for your career. After that, you can start worrying about the actual job, which is fairly inconsequential. The title doesn't matter, the pay doesn't matter, because you'll have many jobs. Every 18 months, people change jobs. So how unimportant is that job? And look, it wasn't too late for me. I was in my late 30s when I came to Silicon Valley. But when I came here, people looked at my resume and like, dude, what have you been doing?
Yeah.
I came out of Michigan. That's great for the auto industry. It's not great for what I was doing.
Yes. We have two closing questions. The first one being, with everything that's happening in the world of with AI, what do you think our world looks like in 10 years?
Yeah, I don't know whether 10 years is a good time frame, because I think this is a dislocation, and that is on the scale of the Industrial Revolution, right? Prior to the Industrial Revolution, 95% of all people worked in agriculture, and afterwards it was like 2%, right? People moved to the cities, away from, the rural areas. They didn't even have subdivisions or suburban environments back then, and everybody, the jobs were new and all of that. It used to be in the time of our parents that, one career would last you a lifetime. That's already over. That's been over. You have to, you will shift careers inside your lifetime. Now it's like, you need to shift. You need to be ready to shift like all the damn time, like almost in a fluid motion. And I find that incredibly challenging, because people will become exasperated. They're like, unless you want to be a plumber or an electrician, I think you're going to be totally fine for a long period of time. But it's especially for people that get sort of these white collar university educations, whether it's communications or business or marketing. God help you. You need to start thinking much, much harder about what this means and what it could mean, and how do you stay relevant in that world and in the most critical version of the future you can possibly come up with. It will be okay. No, it won't. It will not. It will be for some, but not for others. You have to use the analogy a lot, about newspapers that looked like they're going to be fine in the early 2000s. In the end, they were all killed, and they had to change their business models and what they did and all. And we don't really have journalism anymore anyways. So sometimes it just takes longer to play out, but it's playing out all right,
Okay, final question. With everything you know about life now, and this moment of AI, what would be the singular piece of advice you'd give to the 25-year-old Frank today?
Learn how to talk to a prompt. I'm only slightly tongue in cheek on that one, because what I'm really saying is, how do you interact with machines is really the question, right? And how does that evolve? Because in my entire history, I've been talking to machines in very arcane languages and navigational methods and all this kind of stuff, and I never ever thought I would see the day, that the boundaries between man and machine were completely erased. It's extraordinary. But what does that now mean for those of us whose skills are all around talking to machines? Notably programmers, who are, that skill is the first to go, not the last.
Yeah. Well, Frank, you've been incredibly gracious with your time and your place. Thank you for hosting us here in Kona, Hawaii, at your home. Thank you very much.
Totally
Thanks for
welcome.
doing this.
You bet.